where Facebook is so big. My husband has an immune deficiency. Look what's popping up.
Okay, everybody ready to go? Okay, 5:40. Why don't we jump in?
5:40.
I thank everybody for coming. Ray is, well,
That
by
one's
that
not.
clock,
Oh,
my
by
clock
that
says
clock.
5:30, sorry.
All right.
It's 5 something.
Exactly 5:38.
I have 5:30.
Ray Tell is not going to be able to make it tonight. He called in earlier today, so don't expect him for the work session or the council meeting this evening. Just as a refresher for the audience and everybody who's here, at the last city council meeting on April 9th, we approved a scope of work with our architect and friend, from Partners and Architects, to do a concept plan, 3 versions minimum, I guess, site scheme, and a cost estimate for the Mav Road property site on Dexter and Arbor Road. So this workshop, we got the facilities agenda. What we'd like to do is start off at least by letting Courtney and David lead us into this process. Chief, please come up if you would. I anticipate that you'll be asked some questions. If you would, we have representatives of the Sheriff's Department, Lisa and Greg here, right? Yes, sir. Hopefully we can have an engaged discussion about space and assumptions and needs, and I'm just going to turn it over to the architect and Courtney to do this, and David, obviously engage council as you need to, or a question back and forth.
A little bit of both.
Fred, former facility committee member, if you've got a question, raise your hand, we'll get you involved, okay?
Will do. No problem.
And then if time allows, we'll move on to, or time will allow, we'll move on to city offices or something else and see where this goes. How's that sound?
So David, I provided David with these site layouts because fortunately we had a nice survey because Rainbow, they had to survey it to split it into 2 parcels, so that's been completed. So I sent that to David, which I think I put in the packet actually. And then I just wanted to give him a chance to kind of talk about where he's coming at, if he has any questions that we can help answer as he gets started on the process. So, David, if you want to.
How about if I jump in here?
Okay.
We're going to start, if you don't mind, handing out something. And this will be in addition to what Courtney sent out in her package. And some of it may look the same. I'll describe why it's different. If you don't mind, I'm going to do that now.
Yeah.
So here's generally what I'm going to try to cover. And this is describing to you in a very abbreviated form, in a work plan in terms of activities, and then
Thank you.
making a proposal, kind of spelled out the deliverables. But as you may know, as we've worked together in the past, we kind of zig and zag as we need to answer questions and give you things that clarify. So it won't be limited, basically what I'm saying, to what was in the proposal for the deliverables. That's part 1. Try not to jump ahead and look at any of this too
I'll
close.
just keep my
They look at Paul, right at your Paul when you said that.
camera, turn it down, hold it. I'll look at the test before it's time to pick up the
Right,
pencil.
yeah.
Thank you.
I think just out of customary practice, we three-hole punch them. I think
Keep trying for the
one needs
binder.
one
That's
hand.
right. Good thinking.
Okay. Next one here. Next one. Additional. And run over that. And Dave. Greg needs to be checked. So we met before. Nice to meet you. Okay. All right, so if you beat a little bit of the agenda, it's called agenda, but really what it is trying to describe to you the process that I'm going to go through. And what will be Brian, and most of you either have met him or worked with him in the facility group setting. So first and foremost, we did get the survey or the survey document that he sent, Gordon. And it might be helpful for us if we got something that was digital, if that's available,
can ask
that we
them.
can manipulate.
Michelle, can you ask and see if we can get that, the remainder parcel survey that's in the facility packet digitally from the Rainbow people? I don't remember. I mean, you mean like in CAD digitally?
Yeah, whatever format they have,
In
CAD more than likely what they have.
Okay. I think I have a PDF, but I think you want
It'll
this.
cover 'em. And if you don't get that, it won't be the end of the world. Can you two share if you don't mind?
Of course.
It won't be the end of the world if we don't get that, but
Okay, we
it would
can
be
try.
helpful.
Yeah.
A quick survey of the land, I've seen it before, obviously. In fact, we did a little bit of a test for fit some time back in terms of is it a viable piece of property for a station of the size we were looking at that time, and we did that with a number of parcels. So in our minds, that answer was already given, but when you flip through some of the stuff I handed out tonight, it's what we looked at before, so it might be a little bit of a refresher. But I looked at the site a little bit more carefully today in terms of what's really there, the characteristics of it. So there's some pretty good topography. There's 2 curb cuts, which is nice. There's some trees, which probably wouldn't be that big of an effect. There's an incoming utility, the pole will probably have to be moved. And there's other planning principles, obviously, that we're going to have to take into consideration with proximity to the intersection. But those are all just kind of part of what we're going to do when we do the site analysis. And I said,
Sorry, can I jump in there one?
sure, anytime.
second?
It goes for everybody too, if you have a
So
question.
just to make sure we're all on the same page, and I think I put this in the text of the email that I sent you on the curb cut, because right now in the plan for the Rainbow Childcare, the curb cut's going to be moved to this new spot, and there isn't. I think that they're going to remove the other one at the same time,
Okay.
according to their current plan.
Yeah, and we'll take all that into consideration.
Right.
I know there's a cross-access easement, at least that's
Correct.
proposed, and
To have done.
we'll look at all those sorts of things when we get into the site analysis. So we'll look at it from as we did in the other properties, in the assessment process, we'll look at other things, characteristics of the site, benefits and challenges. So we'll do that here too. And I say we're going to look at 3 alternatives. There'll be many more than that, but we want to bring 3 viable options to you that make sense from one perspective or another. Hopefully one will rise to the top as like the clear, obvious choice, but who knows? We'll see when we get to that part of the project. And a lot of that work we're going to do independent on our own because it's kind of not necessarily the user group at the initial part, so we'll come up with the concepts and then we're going to want to meet with the groups, obviously, at that point. And that kind of leads into the next part of what I've been calling our workflow, our work plan. So once we get the information, we're going to start with work sessions. And the work sessions are going to be kind of repeats to what we've done before, but maybe a little bit more in depth in terms of working with the user groups. So we have a program. We have several programs, actually. We did an assessment, and then we did a needs analysis and produced a program during the assessment study plan. That study plan was based on input from the department at that time or early on. And some standards that we see used in the station. So we looked at it from a practical standpoint in a real needs-based discussion. The time went on and personnel changed. A new chief came on board and we reassessed the initial needs and we came up with a revised program. And that's what I handed out to you tonight. So you'll see some funny things in it, yellow empty boxes. And that was because we were in the process of looking at it and making adjustments to it. And some of those questions didn't get totally answered. So that'll be really what we want to do when I'm saying program refinement is we want to engage again with the administration, with the fire department, with the sheriff's department, and reanalyze what we've already done, particularly the fire department, because that's where we had some adjustments happening during the planning of what a new station would look like. And that plan, there's a new station plan in that packet as well. And that shouldn't be new news to anybody. It's the same thing we had shown before. But the square footages in that more closely represent the adjusted program. So I'll just use simple numbers. It was 12,000 square feet somewhere in the beginning for the fire only, and then it was 16,000 as we adjusted it. And a number of those adjustments were just added spaces, not spaces made bigger, but some were made bigger. So that plan represents more closely the adjusted program. And I think an adjusted program probably represents more of what you need based on conversations with the chief. So that'll be something we want to pick up, go through again, vet it, challenge it, maybe adjust it even further, certainly fill in the blank. So that'll be part of what happens in work session 1. And then we'll, at that time, share the analysis of the site that we had done prior to going to the meeting. And that'll be the way we plan these work sessions. That's kind of a roll up your sleeves, kind of talk about what we were thinking, and then hear a response, and then together in a collaborative forum, react to that presented idea to, you know, an idea that we kind of work on and come up with together as a work group. So that's how I envision the work sessions to be. Number 2 would be us coming back to the work session and user group with the program as we felt it was confirmed based on the refinements. And then at that point, look for agreement that that is the program we're going to follow when we're doing the planning of the building. And we'll also have site design. Now that'll be where you see 3 different options of where a building would fit, how you access the site, how you leave the site, whether you're going to an event or you're just coming and going as a firefighter. And then building concepts. So we'll introduce that really preliminary, crudely at that stage. We'll take the confirmed program and come up with a first idea and present that to the user group as building concepts. And then work session 3, we come back together. And this obviously is kind of like a week-by-week progression is what we're thinking, is to keep some momentum going. We can certainly change that depending on the makeup of the group that's going to be meeting. And I assume it'll be administration, fire, and sheriff. So we'll pick a day that works, that is good for everybody, that we can do in consecutive weeks or every other week, whatever makes sense to the group. But I'd like to do it with some regularity to it, not 3 or so weeks in between or something like that. And then we're coming together for the 3rd work session. We all feel pretty comfortable with the program, the size of the building that should be, all the spaces that are included, how the site accommodates the building in terms of, you know, placement and how you get in and out of the site. And then kind of what the building form is going to be in terms of plan diagram and the movement, maneuvering by personnel throughout the building and how the spaces internally relate. So we're going to be pretty close to what we're going to call a pretty good concept plan or preliminary plan, something you'd say, here's what we're going to try to do. It won't be perfect, but it'll be a pretty good preliminary plan that's going to get finessed once you go to the next step beyond this project, which would be development of the building plans. Also, that would be characteristics of the building in terms of imaging and so forth, or we could do that now, which I suggested in the enhanced part of the project. But certainly could not do that and totally get enough information for you to decide how you want to proceed, you know, with the information of a possible project on that building, on that parcel of land. So I don't know if you've flipped yet in any of these things, but I'm going to back up a little bit before I go on to item number 3, the document preparation.
Can you look at these now?
Yeah, please do. So the first one is the program, and you can see it almost looks like a work in progress, because that's exactly the way we left it when we were at that stage. The program you have in your packet that you received prior to tonight is a finished program at an earlier state in the thinking of what this fire station should be. So this program is closer to more likely than what we're going to end up with once we get user group inclusion. So the plans you're looking at was, here's a piece of land, will our building that we're talking about fit? So this was a test for fit. This by no means is an idea of, it could wind up being one, but this was not the intention. The intention was, let's take our footprint, put it down, see how vehicles could circulate around the building and in and out of the site, so we know that this is a viable site to consider. And this was, I don't know, last summer, maybe middle of the summer we were doing that, something around then. So there's 2 different versions of it. The idea would be you're coming in and off of Andover Dexter Road. There is an inlet off of Eaton Court, which we may try to capitalize on. That might be an option that you decide you don't want to enter into what seems more residential area. They just come in and off of there, maybe even in off of Meadowview. Just an option. But you can see from this test for fit exercise, the building fits, parking fits, and there's multiple options to get in and out of the site. A couple things that you're going to have to deal with, possibly off-site, that will be a detailed kind of conversation. That's traffic control. The station will want to have the ability to control the traffic light and possible additional light more to the, I don't know what way that is, when you're going towards the Chevrolet dealership. They're probably likely east. So there'd probably be another light there that'd be controlled by the station. It'd be more of a stop, exiting fire apparatus, and it wouldn't be a traffic light. It'd just be to control the traffic situation. And then the last thing in the packet there is a plan, and this, as I looked at it again today before coming, I thought, oh, this is a really good start at something, but it's really not mature yet. But it put everything in a pretty close location to its neighboring, reasonable relationship to its space that it should be connected to, and it came up with a square footage that really closely matched the program. But there are going to be things here when we're together as a group looking at it that should be in a different location for one, should be bigger or smaller, or doesn't need to be there at all. And really possibly there's something that should be there that isn't there. So those are the answers that we're going to uncover together in the work session 1, 2, and 3. And then we'll end up, when we start looking at item 3 on what I call my workflow plan, the document preparation. The deliverables that we're going to provide are a site plan. You'll have backup to getting to a site plan with the multiple versions of it. You'll have a building plan that shows, how big it is and so forth. And if you so choose, we do some kind of character study of what it might look like in context of the neighboring buildings or what it looks like all by itself. That's an option. And then a budgeting document that says here's a probable cost for the necessary site improvements that are be needed in the building that we're talking about. And it could get to I'll say a general number, but the detail of that costing will be without having an idea what the building looks like. As a real example, is it a pitched roof, one single pitch, crossing gables kind of thing, or is it a flat roof? And that, without knowing what the building looks like, could impact cost. So to guard against it being wildly different than what anybody might expect, part of our deliverables will be a narrative. So if we don't show you a pictorial, if you choose that you don't want one, our narrative will describe those elements that will impact cost. So at least when you look at a budget, a plan, and a site, there's something else that's describing it's made of this and it's like this. That way it's a better picture than your imagination, which could wind up as I'm counting you 8 different ideas. But this will help hone in on it. So once we start the document preparation, we'll have several iterations of it, I'm sure, and that's what I'm calling our draft process. So we're going to want to share that and get feedback with the group, and we're going to want to review that with you, the council, to say here's kind of where we are before we go full speed into finalizing things, because I'm sure that we're going to get valuable input and direction when we come back and share that with you. And then we'll use that kind of going into our final document preparation, which will be another checkpoint. I don't really say that here, but it would be something from this meeting that we're going to have that with the user group will, again, talk about what we heard and how we address the comments or the direction that we got from the council. And then we'll finalize it, and then we'll come back to you and present it for or whatever it is you want to do. But since I have a lot of people here tonight, I think if I can, I'll just dive into a couple of the questions, maybe, not really questions, but requests. So the chief and the sheriff's department, as you're looking at this, obviously you haven't had a chance to digest it, but there's going to be things here that you want to get my understanding of what it is, and you're going to want to offer your input. So I'm asking you maybe to prepare think through those, and if you glance at it tonight and you see something you want to talk about, I'd rather, at least start that now, but be totally fine if we don't have any input. But if you see something here that you don't think we need or not big enough, or something we need that's not here, it would help me get ready for our first session.
David, maybe we could talk some about, obviously when we first looked at this, it was just fire station, and now it's what we asked for was incorporating the sheriff. So how do you kind of see that working? Have you thought about that?
I think in our early discussions of program refinement together as a user group, we're going to want to identify things that are common, that can be used commonly between the two departments. Because what I've found when we combine public safety together is that even though it's a space that can be used by both, they prefer not to, and they have good reasons why. So I want to get a clear understanding between fire and police. If there's something that looks common and isn't, let's identify that now so I can plan accordingly in the program. And what would happen is this all will be unified to one planning or programming document. But there are a number of things that we're going to at least throw out there that common use, economy of space, economy of dollars, that makes sense from a public safety standpoint for fire and police being together, fire and sheriff being together.
Does that comment that you made about they want their separate things, is that as relates to a full combination of a police department and a fire department, or is it a little bit different when it relates that this is a substation to the sheriff's activities?
We can ask, the sheriff's here, so we can,
Yeah, well, that's,
the office is here.
Good question.
that's a question to ask everybody.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is, but
If you guys have any comments you want to share while we're all together about
Yeah.
what you might
Please-
be interested
please
in
feel free to
combining,
share.
what you don't, that'd be helpful, just conversationally.
One of the major things that comes up is locker rooms. Does not being separate.
Well, and one of the challenges with this versus many other places is the fire department and the police department are separate entities. It's not the city of Dexter Police and the city of Dexter Fire Department. So there's greater need for, likely for that separation.
So again, my name's Greg Bozick. I'm in the role of Chief Deputy at the Sheriff's Office. That's just a fancy way of saying I'm number 3, I guess. That's how it looks on an organizational chart. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for about 2 years, and then prior to that, I retired from the City of Ann Arbor Police Department. I was a Deputy Chief there, and I was with them for 25 years. So now Lisa may have some other perspectives, because I think your question might, be a little bit different from different perspectives of different people in law enforcement. I have an experience where I was in a role for about 2 years in an assignment, and we were housed in one of the substations in Ann Arbor Fire Department. And it integrated fine. We weren't a public safety department. There's just some unique needs, I think, for the police side of it that have to be considered. The two primary ones are weapons storage. The fact is that it would be hard to share locker room space just as open space because of that fact. As far as the workspace itself, the office space, the state of Michigan and the federal government have pretty strict policies about criminal justice information systems. And really every computer terminal that we use is what's called a LEIN terminal. LEIN stands for Law Enforcement Information Network. And those really have to be strictly controlled. Anyone who's not an active law enforcement officer that would have access either has to go through escorted all the time or has to clear a background check. So, for the sake of saving a lot of heartache for everybody, it's probably best when we look at those workstations and workspaces to try to find a way to carve space out so that that is, somewhat segregated just for the sheriff's staff. There may be occasion to interview witnesses or victims of crime, so we would want to also think about how we would incorporate that too, because we wouldn't want I mean, I wouldn't, if I were a crime victim, want to come into an area that I felt was open and I didn't have a little bit of privacy. Now, again, that could be, something that could be done in a shared space. I'm not suggesting that that has to be a sole conference room or interview room for sheriff's staff, but I think those are the kinds of things that really, from the law enforcement side, need to have specific consideration. I too think that approaching it from economies of scale makes the most sense. There's no need of duplicating space for the sake of duplicating it. You will have, Paul, some folks that feel like police have to be police and fire have to be fire. That I don't subscribe to that. I think culturally, though, the two cultures, still try to remain, distinct and separate with identities. But by and large, the people that actually are working in the stations together get along just fine. So.
And they work together now, to some extent.
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. And Chief, did I do that justice? Did I say that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the only other thing to add is the fact that the police are generally 8 to 10 hour shifts, so they're coming and going and working all the time, where our guys stay 24, and so it's kind of like home. They have their bunk rooms and their quiet spaces, and so that needs to be segregated. And
right.
Bear in mind, this was put together some time ago before they even thought about putting the sheriff in, so there's nothing solid about this. There's tweaks, and I'm actually excited. I think we can make it work and do a good job for Dexter.
Yeah, as do we. Actually, I think it's a good approach to it.
Lisa, what do you think are the most important things, as far as the space you have now and what you would want in the future? Obviously it's probably, male and female segregated area. What, you've been in that station obviously more than we have, and I know that the deputies don't spend a ton of time actually inside now because they do a lot of the reporting and things outside.
So for us, like for workstations, because right now we have 3 workstations for the deputies, and so if they're in there working on reports, and sometimes we have the Marine deputies stop in for the summer who are working on the lakes, and so they need a computer to use. Or if it's a countywide deputy who's coming in, which also is good for the community because you have extra deputies in the city, that if we could have 4 possible workstations, that would be perfect. Right now we have 3. And if we could have a male, female, in the female locker room could be 3 or 4 lockers. It doesn't have to be a lot, but if we could have a male-female locker room, that would be one request. We don't even need 2 bathrooms, like even just 1 bathroom. So that would just be, if anything, that would be a request from what we have right now. Even the layout of the office right now is fine.
Yeah, because it's kind of an open area for the reports, and then I know one of the things Jeff or Keith had mentioned was just that if you wanted to interview someone privately, you pretty much had to use his office, which means he couldn't if someone else needed it, so.
Exactly, and right now, sometimes if we interview somebody, we have to use the break room. So if we did have like a small interview room that we could use, and we do have our body-worn cameras, so we can use that as a device to record. So it's not like we need an additional recording coming into the room. So that would facilitate that as well. But if we just had a small room that we could utilize that would be great.
Lisa, would that work? Along the lines, one of the things you see in this plan was a conference room off from the chief's office. So just a conference room like that's lockable.
That'd be perfect.
So another dual purpose type room.
That might be the way we start bringing some economy to spaces, and what we could separate from one side to the other. I think, and I didn't talk a lot about the sheriff's program, but we did do that in the assessment process, and I forgot the gentleman's name, but maybe it was Keith.
Yes.
That I worked with. And we identified a number of spaces, like you mentioned, the interview room and the / break room, everything kind of space that you have. There was a number of things that we introduced to the program that you don't currently have in a fashion that's adequate. Like your armory, your equipment room, those sorts of almost catch-all spaces are more clearly identified as individual spaces in the new program. So it's a bigger space by program than what you have now. But I think it could be smaller, and that'll be maybe what we look at and may right size it. I'm not saying it needs to be smaller. It may wind up being bigger depending on what it is that we talk about. But right now, I think we have things pretty well situated, just a matter of right size is it needed or not needed? And can it be used in a common way with fire side?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, back to, if you look at the program and, kind of redline it, and that way we can have a jump start with the sheriff before our meeting, and we can start with, a little bit of our feet on the ground before we even get to our first work session. So that's kind of the outline of how we plan to approach this and where we were going to engage with the user groups, how we were going to report back to you, and ultimately what we were going to provide in terms of the deliverables from this effort. Any questions from you guys, or anything particular you want me to expand on?
David, the 66-foot wide ingress egress easement that's showing on here, I don't know, Michelle, do you know in any of your research on this parcel what that,
On the western side of the
is that
property.
something we should get extinguished?
Yeah.
That's already,
Has it been?
yeah, that's
Okay,
already
I
done.
was wondering if it had, okay, it was still showing up on the survey.
Yeah, because what it is it's an old road.
Okay, so that doesn't need to be
It
considered
doesn't
by
need to be there
David.
anymore.
Okay.
And this is a cross access, similar here.
Yeah. That, so, that's it right there.
So we don't have to honor it?
No, we do have to, because that's how you get through the rainbow
Is that
recreation.
the only way?
Yeah, well, plus this, and you thought fire department wanted access.
Okay, as long as it's just fire department access, okay.
Well, fire department wanted the 2 access points,
Mhm.
and planning commission wanted to make sure there were 2 access points. There was a lot of pushback from the residents of Eden Court,
Mhm.
that if there was only 1 entrance, that would be too much traffic back there.
Yeah. So is it possible in whatever this turns out to be, that easement doesn't stay there, could be there forever?
Howard, this gets you in and out of the site. There's no road up here.
I'm looking at that as a cross access, so if this site goes to that site, vice versa, not off.
Yes, it is only off Ann Arbor Road. So you come in to go here, in to go there.
Gotcha.
That was done prior to any
Mm.
knowledge or planning that this could be a fire
Yeah, I
station.
don't really like that, can you get rid of that?
We can move it down, possibly.
Okay,
Actually, no, they can't even move it down because the site's being
With
developed
that.
with that. in mind.
Okay. We'll work on that.
So you put that up there. Okay. Is this all over here because you're not?
This is just a.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
asking. Because that'll help me know what I have to give you in the future if there's any.
You know, I wouldn't react to anything here other than we think it fits. We'll get more detail as we move ahead, but this is just to show that it fits on the site.
Okay, John, you're next. I got one.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe an appropriate question would be, how much parking do we need on site? And how will we arrive at that number in terms of...
It's a very good question.
There's deputies' vehicles that are, we know that those are stored there, and we know that the sheriff deputies, when they come, leave a vehicle before they pick up a deputy vehicle. And similarly, the firefighters come and park. And this doesn't show, I don't think, enough to do the training that generally I've seen or observed. So how will we arrive at that number? Maybe a little bit of discussion back and forth on that topic.
So that's a great question. I mean, that's going to be a critical question to how this site will perform. And this site shouldn't be, judged in that way, because there is no thought about parking here. It's just we plopped it on here. And this wasn't really about today.
Yeah, it's not a complete thought yet. I get
But
it.
the question is really a good question, because we've struggled with that, especially, I'll use, other sites that we studied, we looked at those things you pointed out. Sheriff shows up for duty, leaves the car, takes the car. There's potential for public arriving. There's firefighters that need space, there's the public that goes to the fire station, and then there's the event, where you have a bunch of people coming all at once, needing to park in a way that's manageable for apparatus coming and going, or going in that case. So that is a big exercise when we look at these options of how you would place the building on the site. that's going to impact the solution. So it is going to be, I'll call it the key ingredient to how we make this work. The building is going to have a form, but it's not going to be able to zig and zag too much. The parking is going to be the variable in terms of its geometry, but the quantity is going to have to be based on the users of the building. It won't be based on ordinance requirements, X square feet equals a parking spot. We'll use the user count in the worst case scenario. So we have a training facility for 50. How do we accommodate workers plus the event of a training facility? And that'll drive how we place the building, because we're going to need to use a majority of the site for parking.
Chief, where does I know on the Huron Valley ambulance system, their vehicles are out and about all over hiding, ready to mobilize, and then they shift when something gets called and all this
Right.
stuff. Where are the common hiding spots? I guess what I mean by that is it possible that they would want to use this site, make sure that we allow a spot for that if that's likely to be a spot for that?
I mean, that's a good question. They go all over the place, and you can see them up at the bank, actually right next to that. Occasionally they're sitting there. Sometimes they're at Siles Station, sometimes they're up at 5 Point. It's all computer, and they can actually move to some place anywhere on the side of the road and sit based on the potential for the next call. But they do try to pick some of those pre-designated places so that they're hidden out of the way. I don't know all of them, but you will see them up at Country Market occasionally sitting up there. So would they sit there? You know, they sit in our station a lot now.
Yeah, but that's why that's
two or three times a day they might be there
make
for
sure
an
you
hour.
account for that is all I'm
Does
thinking.
HVA still keep the Echo unit in town?
Yes, it's out on Joy Road.
It is still there? Okay.
That's where they stay overnight.
Right.
But they don't like staying out there, so they come down and visit us all the time. So.
Boring.
And they
You know,
still have
the-
their main,
the traffic
main
thing
place
is
over there in
interesting.
Chelsea, right, there by the hospital? By the-
They do have a facility over there.
Facility over there, right straight across from the fitness center.
You know, and then the parking is interesting.
Bays and everything.
90% of the time, we don't need a lot of parking, but during that training, that surge time or that run time, or when we're coming back from an incident where we've been out fighting fire and we got to clean stuff up, we take up a lot of space, which is why I recommended early 2.5 to 3 acres is about as small as you want to go. And you know, this site is just makes it for us, but we may have some parking issues there. Not as bad as we have now, but we may still have some.
Well, thanks for letting me get
No. It relates to the same thing, or similar things, I think, about part. There has been a mention of the word two-story, that when we incorporated the sheriff philosophy into this, that was a possibility. Want to just give me your thoughts on that, cost-wise, flow-wise, anything that you have?
That's $3.5 million for a fire pole.
Here we are, okay. $3.5 million for a fire pole?
Is the firefighters gonna go down or the police?
We've got a flagpole down there at the park.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, a two-story facility is not something we shy away from. It's an appropriate solution for some situations. Doing a number of them, or 2 of them right now, where it's a multiple-story fire and police. But it's not a uncommon thing. There's a stacking that we look at first from economy of cost. You have to look at how does it affect cost. If you can't stack the second floor in a way that it really optimizes the first floor foundations, then you're adding costs above and beyond circulation.
I got that.
So we look to do that. In some cases where we've done the second story, the overall building got a little bit bigger because it was cheaper to make the building bigger than to make the second floor smaller than the first floor. If that makes sense.
Say it again.
It was cheaper to make the building bigger than to make the second story smaller than the first floor. So it just kind of, the outsides of the building were same ground up.
Right.
So that turned out in that situation to be cheaper than reducing the square footage on the second floor.
And I guess part of that question is related to what Sean said. is that if you do put the sheriffs in there and you do need some other space, that if you did stack second story, that would give you additional parking spaces, maybe, or area for parking.
That's a great outcome.
Or circulation or anything about that.
That's a great outcome.
Okay, just a thought.
The thing we look at there is that we don't want to ever jeopardize the hot zone layout of the firefighting side.
Oh, I got that.
We want to be able to get from any point to the apparatus as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and Lisa had her hand up there.
I'm just curious to know if anybody's reached out to the citizens in the neighborhood north of where the station would go. One of our policies is every shift when our deputies start, they have to check their lights and sirens. So it's going to be additional noise to everybody in that neighborhood, so it's a little bit concerning. I don't want to be responding to our own noise complaints.
We have
Probably no more than those kids that'll be in the daycare center though.
Only they do go home.
And your shift change to 7/7?
No, 8, 4, and midnight.
Okay. That one might be a little
Still
more
on 8.
challenging.
Drive out of town for the midnight.
Yeah.
We do ours every day at 8 o'clock too, or between 7 and 8 o'clock. Our provision for that would be to do it on the street side rather than on the back side of the building, and you get a little bit of muffling there.
Sure, they would do the same thing.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to work on here as far as the whole layout, so some of that can be pre-programmed.
My question was is related to cost as well as the layout for space for parking. Thank you. Zach, I think is, had his hand up over there. I think so. See, he's
No, I was
going
just
to throw
pointing
against
out.
the wall.
We had talked about having some indoor car storage for the sheriff, I think, right, in one of the, on the,
That was a preference when we did the programming, that there were indoor
or covered
storage.
in some way,
Covered at the minimum, indoor would be ideal,
right?
but I think
I mean, for the work vehicles, obviously. Like the deputy, the sheriff's deputy vehicles. I thought
they're
one-
personal vehicles or
No,
patrol?
they're patrol.
Yeah, patrol vehicles. There's
I'm moving to
There's
work
a
on
real
Station
benefit
3.
to having those vehicles indoor just from the longevity and response readiness, so if
Right.
they're a cold winter, I mean, all electronics in there take a while to get ramped up, so. And I've done a couple studies of that for other stations where it really pays off to have those vehicles in a tempered space, not a totally environment comfortable space, but
Right.
tempered.
Even if it was
We
covered.
don't want them to be too comfortable.
Well, the example that I did the case study on was on a much larger fleet.
Right.
So it probably diminishes down to not beneficial for a smaller fleet.
Mhm.
But you're right, the first program did call for the
Yeah.
as a request.
One extra covered space for when the city manager pulls in.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't have to park outside anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefit. There's, employee safety. I mean, they're lugging gear. I assume you guys have gear bags that you're pulling in and out during shift changes, so when you're getting in and out of your vehicle, and just in the environment that we are today, it's nice to have a little bit of a security for the officers to get in and out, not to worry about whatever during shift change.
So how many trucks are we designing this for?
The last count, I think, was 8. Chief, is that still right?
I believe we were looking at 10 apparatus.
10.
When you look at the squads and the
Oh,
gators.
yeah, okay. Yeah, we did have a number of other things.
There were 5 drive-through bays, so that would accommodate 10 vehicles.
Yeah, okay, I got, just on my drafting, I have 8, but,
Was it 8?
yeah, but I do have something parked in the maintenance called / wash bay.
Yes, that's
If I could refresh my memory, maybe when we talk, we go through that a little bit more in
No,
detail.
that is a 5 bay, what you had, what I would consider 5 bays.
Yeah,
Is there a leaf storage bay?
What?
A leaf sucker storage bay?
I'm glad you asked that question.
The important questions.
But I was thinking it, Zach, I want you to know. What,
Dan's gonna take.
how many vehicles do we have stored at the main station right now?
Huh.
Including the 2 Hart vans? Sorry, did I say 2? I think we have 2 now.
We
Yeah, there
have
are 2
6
now.
vehicles there right now, but we're short, the tower's not in the city right now because it's out of service. So we have 6 between the upstairs and the downstairs. And then Hart
So-
van's down there.
So if you add in the tower, that's 7. What are the other ones we would have?
Right now we have, to throw the tower in, we got 2 tankers, an engine, 2 squads, and the gator. And there was room for an ambulance there, so that gave us 8 at the time.
There was a boat?
And then there was a boat, but we've got since gotten rid of that boat.
I do have a boat that I can put there. I'm being serious. If you look at the county structure, most of our lakes are in Dexter Township, and all of our boats in the winter season are stored in Pittsfield Township. So if it was structured, if there was extra space and we could stick a boat in your bay, it would work really nice.
You know, I was trying to keep the bay size down, but if you want to go to 6 bays.
What if
can
we
do
trade the
that.
leaf machine for the boat that's needed in Dexter Township?
There's a boat at Dexter Township, that belongs to the Swiftwater team. You know, if you build the space, we'll fill it, there's absolutely no doubt.
No doubt about that.
You build it, they will come, huh?
But with what Dave's put together here, adding another bay in there wouldn't, and looking at the site, it probably wouldn't be that much to do that or hurt us too terribly bad. If we were to go to 2nd story and then all those creature things like the fitness room or bunk rooms, all those things that just firefighters do go on the 2nd floor, it becomes a really, really nice building.
An added benefit from that, speaking as an urban planner, is that you get more of a presence on the street, and it helps define that a bit more, without having the ridiculous 15 feet sticking above a roof type thing.
You're saying the 2nd story does?
Yep.
It doesn't make the building look gaudy because the apparatus bays are notoriously high already, and so they already look like they're 2 stories.
Having that stuff on the 2nd floor isn't a problem, isn't a response time concern then?
No, it's actually a little bit faster if the bunk rooms are built closer to the wall between the bay area and the living area, and then you carve out an alcove for a pole. Getting down that pole from the bunk room is actually much faster than coming from the offices.
And typically on a single floor layout, there's a real challenge of everything wants to be in the
Right there.
nucleus, but not everything can be, so you have to compromise the paths and the distance. So like you say, having the ability to slide down that wall, stair or pole, is a plus. Or can be.
Question for both you and city staff. When in this workflow will you get a solid price? Or at least a pretty good estimate for the cost?
It would begin at the early stages of this. We would start tracking that. And we'd be sharing it on an ongoing basis with the user group meetings. When we came back at the draft stage to council, we'd have the solution that looks like where we're going and its cost. And then it would be refined and then presented as a final cost. But the point of having it at your draft cost, you can challenge that, the bottom line, if you will, in terms of how much is this thing going to cost, and send us back to the drawing board, so to speak, at that point, because of any number of reasons, but at that point, cost could be one of them.
And for city staff, when do we need to have language for the fall ballots? Fall
Yeah, I
winter
was just
ballots?
looking at it, I put it on my calendar.
31st.
No, it's August, yeah, it's August 14th.
August 14th?
Yeah, that, the July date was if you were doing like a signature and you had to
Okay,
turn it in.
August.
So, yeah, it's August
For the
14th,
November 6th,
or November, yeah.
November 6th.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
So basically, the August 13th meeting would be the last time we could pass language.
So help me, David, again with Zach's question, when does council see the draft cost?
That would be at the
Which of those
point where
dates?
we're coming to you for direction and input, so that would be
May 28th.
May 28th. But it won't be a subject we haven't covered up to that point. It's just when we're coming back formally, we'll be talking about it in the work sessions leading up to it. And if you decide that, oh, I really need to know at a certain date prior to that, we'll accommodate.
Well, they'll share the information. That's fine.
That's 5 weeks from now.
Right on schedule.
If I'm right? I got my calendar. I didn't have my shoes off, but I'm still like them. Yeah, 5 weeks from now. Today.
Any adjustments you want me to make to the work plan, maybe particularly about, how I might keep you updated? Maybe it's the user group that does that. I'd be more than glad to add in a couple more sessions where I'm coming here and outlining the progress we've made, if that's something you'd like me to do.
In a sense, on this work session 3, you've got it down if needed, so that's a little bit of flex.
And I was joking when I said that. We
I
need-
figured as fast as we move, we probably won't need that.
Can you leave another set of what you gave us per rate? We can get that.
I can if you want, I got some doodles on mine.
I can give him mine, Jim.
Oh, okay.
I'll make a copy of it.
Oh.
I can give it mine.
You know, I can make a copy.
And I'll send you an electronic copy,
Yeah, that's-
just so you have that former record.
So David, at the end of this, we go through this exercise and we get a floor plan, if you will, and I know we're talking about the map site, but if something were to happen where we didn't have that, this building, we're looking at the needs for police and fire, so this building could really be put on another site if we were to find something that's available to do it.
Yeah, I'd say the solution that turns out here is adaptable. I don't think there's any solution we'll come up with that is a plug and play. I mean, everything's influenced by the site, but the plan of the building is going to be unique to your needs, so it can be adapted for the site. But the building, the layout shouldn't change a lot. But you got a really small site, and we have to do 2 stories.
You made 3 stories.
Not unheard of.
Yeah, no, I've done through.
That's where the city offices will go. What's our height restriction? What's our height restriction now?
Is there a poll for that?
They started to get away from them for a few years.
So that's not a problem to have 2-story in through here.
So now we're going back to
I don't think so, but that I can look.
I mean, I'm assuming we would have to follow setbacks and, align it to the rest of the corridor,
Change it.
Well, right, but I mean, at least for planning, I would assume we're erring on the side of following the,
2.5 stories or 35 feet.
Oh.
David, you are aware that
We can make that work.
there's an overlay district also?
Yeah, I sent him that.
Okay.
Somebody in my office is working on that.
Does city ordinance require government buildings to follow local ordinance, or does it exempt them?
We try to set a good example.
We try to set it
I
down.
understand that.
We followed zoning for the DPW, even going to ZBA for the use.
Understand being good neighbors, but
I mean, at least the front, it's gonna make sense for it to be in line with the rest of it.
Yeah.
yeah, the only concern at the front is you need that 50 to 70 foot to be able to put the trucks out on the ramp type area, so.
other thoughts by council or David? Zach?
I will say that 2.3 acres in the city is a pretty big lot, but as has been mentioned, the programming and layout demands for fire station and police stations are very hungry for land, and so that can go very quickly. So I know this is just very schematic, programmatic layout, but it makes me feel better at the elbow room that looks for moving and adding thing and massaging compared to tighter sites. So that is good to see.
So there's 48 spaces shown in the training room on the draft mock-up.
48.
There's 48 chairs in the training room.
Yes.
Are we gonna have 48 spaces?
I think in a total accommodation, we're gonna be in that area to make it work. Not just for that reason, but that may wind up being the maximum use when we look at the different scenarios. So if that's the case, then it'll be set for 48.
Just in the interest of large parking lots and stormwater management and excessive spending, do we need 48? I mean, there's a question for you guys to wrestle with in the user groups. I would argue that number is probably high. But then again, I'm not the fire chief, and I'm not trying to say it's high, I'm just, 48 seems, we don't have to be the center training facility for Washtenaw County.
No, and this would be, I think what David showed there was the fixed seating number. If we're actually doing training that doesn't have desks and chairs lined up, then the square footage per person is much higher. So you might only get 25 people in there in that type of training versus the desk type training, but we are required to do mutual aid training with our mutual aid partners. So you could get that number in there occasionally. It's not going to be every week or even every month, but occasionally you'll have that number in there.
And we found in other design exercises with departments that they don't always use personal cars or personnel size cars. Sometimes they come in apparatus, so we have to have additional apparatus, parking, school bus parking, so all that's going to be considered in the site planning exercise. Another thing would be a stadium style parking, just when you know you're going to have capacity and you don't want to have congestion for the users of the building. When there's training going on, we would consider stadium style parking for at least a portion of it.
What does stadium style parking mean?
It would
Somebody
be,
in.
you pull in butt right next to somebody else that they can't get out unless you leave. So that would be the training parking area. So everybody generally arrives and leaves together. Not always, but that's the concept of using stadium style parking. And it also then lends itself to be a really nice bus parking area when they're not in training. Or,
So we're likely going to have stormwater management costs on this site then.
well, I don't think you're gonna have big stormwater.
Well, the site is eligible to tie into the existing basin.
Right, at a certain C factor.
Right.
I mean, it looks awfully green now with the background, but a lot of that's going to turn into parking. Or a second building for the police. Or
The
extended.
extension.
Either or, I mean, it's just,
It's another,
there's going to be a lot of impervious space added to this that's not shown.
Yes.
Right, that's not gonna.
I mean, so.
You're gonna be approaching 50%, if not more, my gut feeling.
would be another reason for 2 stories.
What was the C factor, do you know, Michelle, for that?
No, I don't know the C factor for that, but I was going to ask the question when you're ready.
Go ahead.
So, Dexter's a walkable community, and I know that this area isn't laid out in the same way as our downtown and our old village, but is there a way to use shared parking at Dexter Crossing for those non-emergency situations where people would just walk to the fire station from Dexter Crossing for those training periods of time, instead of trying to park everything suburban style on this lot?
I love that idea.
Or Mill Creek.
Or Mill Creek. I mean, there are options for shared parking, but if, you know,
But they have to be willing to walk.
well, hello, this is Dexter, and you walk in Dexter.
I think for the training things, that's a good idea.
Are you
can make-
training times are almost always evening times, or are they daytimes?
Usually, well, our interdepartment training or stuff that we do with our own department's always in the evenings right now, although I'd like to have some daytime sessions. All of them are during the evening. We could occasionally get some stuff that we do during the day. Like tonight, the guys are actually doing a VFIS training on ATVs and how to drive them safely. And that would be a class that was better facilitated during the day rather than try to fight the evening hours. So, you know, hopefully we have some expanded capabilities that could do some much better training in both daytime and evening in this facility.
Well, the other site that's very, has a lot of parking is the hospital, or the healthcare site right there, and they don't operate in the evening at all there.
Well, neither might Rainbow.
Rainbow, yeah.
Done by
Rainbow,
6:30.
Those are things that we can write agreements with them and be able to use them, I think.
It's good fun.
Just one way to help with costs on stormwater, at least.
That's a good thought.
All thoughts?
Other thoughts by the sheriff's department or anything?
I just think that, you know, we'll have to, you know, sit down here real quick and just talk about configuration. It seems to me that's probably the more pressing thing for us to talk about as users. That'll help drive the rest of the program.
That and number of cars. Or boats.
David, was that your April 30th meeting to do that, to really?
I'm just suggesting it's that week, whatever day that's common for all of us during that week, sometime in there.
That week actually
Wednesday,
works real
Thursday.
well for me. The following week, I'm out of town, so if we could.
Okay.
I won't be back in town till the mid to end of that week, but we can make that work, like Wednesday, Thursday.
And if you wanted to just throw out availability, maybe I'll do a cross matrix or something and say, here's where we might want to meet. I can be the center for that if you want me to.
That's fine.
Okay, we are at 6:41. Time-wise, do we want to keep going? Anybody have other thoughts on different topics? Do you want to take a break? What do you want to do?
I think it's a little late to get into the city thing, unless somebody's got some. Feel it out.
Just take a break.
Discuss that in context with 15 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm okay with that.
Let's just plan for another work session.
I'm trying to work according to do one a month, if that's okay. I'm trying to do 2 a month, unless we get closer or something. but I'm
We have
trying to do-
budget work on this Wednesday.
Yeah, this might be a lot of meetings. Okay, then we'll consider this adjourned until 7 o'clock. Feel free to grab something to eat, help us use up the food. David, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Lisa,
It's really good to see you back.
Lisa, Craig, Chief, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, and Fred, thanks for coming.
Yeah, Fred, thanks
And
for
Fred,
coming.
thanks for coming. You finally behaved at a meeting.
It's been my pleasure.